What tasty new features does Android Pie bring to smartphones?
And is Epic's Android Fortnite port a huge security nightmare?
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman. I am joined, although not in a surgical sense, by Adam Turner.
Thank God for that.
It's a huge week in Android news, so we've torn him away from his Voltron Lego, and indeed from Ausdroid. It's Dan Tyson. Welcome back to the show, Dan.
Always a pleasure to be on, gentlemen. It's a real cold afternoon here in Canberra, so anything to get me inside and out of that.
Android news dominates this week with the release of Android Pie and the upcoming release of Fortnite for Android devices, and we'll delve into both of those shortly. But first, over to the news desk. What's happening in tech news, Adam?
Vodafone has upped the stakes in the battle for NBN customers by dropping the prices on its bundles for mobile customers. The telco is still offering $10 off its 50 and 100 megabit per second plans for Vodafone postpaid mobile customers, which now brings prices down to $59 and $79 respectively for those 50 and 100 meg plans. The move could trigger a mobile style price war between NBN retailers. It's worth noting that Vodafone still only offers the NBN in some parts of the country, aiming to go nationwide by the end of the year.
The ACCC is set to look into whether or not traditional voice and SMS services should continue to be declared, which is to say regulated, between mobile networks. It cites the growth of over-the-top services in recent years, as well as the shift to more VoIP services relative to when the voice and SMS declarations were made, as key indicators that the current regulatory regime may no longer be sufficient or even required.
NBN is finally boosting the HFC cable network with an upgrade to the DOCSIS 3.1 standard, which has started to roll out across the country. The upgrade lays the groundwork for a major speed boost down the track, with NBN hitting 1 gigabit per second download speeds in the lab with its DOCSIS 3.1 trials. For now, NBN has no plans to increase end user speeds beyond 100 megabits per second. Instead, this capacity boost will help ease congestion on the cable network. Almost 50% of the 4.1 million active premises across the entire NBN network have signed up for speeds of 50 megabits per second or more.
To the surprise of, well, just about nobody, Samsung announced the Galaxy Note 9 at its Galaxy Unpacked event overnight. The Galaxy Note 9 features an upgraded S Pen with Bluetooth compatibility for doing things like taking camera shots, as well as a 4000 mAh battery, showing that Samsung is putting the Note 7 problems behind it, or at least it hopes so. The Note 9 is available for pre-order from today through to the 24th of August, which is when it'll go on full sale. And if you're keen, it's well worth getting in early because the 512 gig model will be available for the price of the 128 gig model up until pre-orders close. So Adam, as someone who's on the HFC NBN roadmap, eventually, at some point in time, I was always looking forward to that idea that at least I could actually get speeds better than the 100 meg plans that were being offered because, hey, DOCSIS 3.1 was coming. DOCSIS 3.1 is here, but I'm not getting my 100 meg plus. What's the deal, man? What's the deal?
You'll get it eventually. I mean, these days I think we really should just be happy if your NBN works at all. I mean, I wouldn't be getting excited about post 100. I'd be getting excited about 50 that doesn't crap itself once a week. This is a good thing, but they're putting that capacity towards making it more reliable, and that to me is much smarter than making more promises that they can't deliver on. I don't think we'll see 1,000 megabits for a long time. They've said even fiber to the premises customers, there's very, very, very little demand for speeds faster than 100 meg. I'd love it, you'd love it, but realistically, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Dan, what's the NBN like in your area? What kind of speeds would you be hoping for?
Well, I'm quite a happy fibre at the premises customer at the moment. I get a solid...
thanks for joining us, Dan. Sorry, I think we've lost him there. Maybe come in next week.
I'm used to being discriminated against from my FTTP connection. But no, I sort of get a great connection. I would actually go more if I could, but yeah... I mean, it does it for now, but if they're going to offer more, I'm willing to pay.
Is it reliable, though? I suppose that probably comes down to your telco as much as the cable in the ground.
Yeah, surprisingly, I'm on TPG, which gets a bit of a bad rap in terms of reliability, but I've literally never had a problem with them on NBN, so I'm pretty happy where I am, actually.
See, jokes aside, this is exactly the problem. And obviously we can't go back in time, the NBN is what it is, but an awful lot of it was built and the whole multi-technology mix was pitched as everyone will be equitable in time, this is how we're going to do this, here's all the roadmaps. You don't need to worry about fibre to the node because of GFast, you don't need to worry about HFC because of DOCSIS. But now they're turning around going, well, actually, look, yeah, these networks are a bit rubbish. And it all has that feel to me of the promises that were made of, everyone will have 25 meg by 2016, and that's going to be enough for any household. And these days, even NBN says, no, nobody should be really try and be on 25. We want everyone on 50 or better. I think if you don't build for the future, if you don't plan for the future, you're basically just saying, well, yeah, Australia is by world standards going to have rubbish internet for a long time. I'm seriously disappointed in this, in that I think it's navel-gazing network design. Google finally revealed what Android P would stand for, but it was, well, a bit of a letdown, wasn't it?
Yeah, Android Pie. I mean, you can have a bit of fun with that, but where's your pavlova? Where's your pistachio? I was hoping they'd come up with something a bit more juicy. Dan, where was the smart money on what P would stand for?
It was really up in the air. I mean, they sort of teased Pie a little while ago because they were actually referring to it as Pecan Pie in AOSP when they were doing all the development of it. So sort of not too far out. I mean, they've referred to a pie as a code name for a while, but I mean, I think everyone was sort of hoping for something a little bit juicier or more pavlova for the Australians. I heard a lot of people floating Pez as an option because they wanted an Android Pez dispenser. But yeah, it is what it is. It's Pi, and yeah, they can do the whole nerdy 3.1415, so yeah, I guess we can stick there. I mean, a year of Pi. Let's move on to Android Tim Tam in 3 years.
Even Pecan Pie would have been better, but it's not just about the fancy naming.
I was hanging out for pickled herring myself.
Pickled herring, pickled figs. There's lots of good ones, but it is actually a reasonably substantial change to Android. It's not just kind of here's some bug fixes and hopefully not too many security nightmares, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a pretty big update. There's not a lot of like forward-facing, customer-facing stuff. A lot of it is, as you said, it's under the hood. It's sort of AI. There is a few things that are actually in it, which are things like the digital well-being sort of stuff. So sort of stopping you from using your phone, or more clearly delineating between work and play and stuff like that. So there's also the main focus is on the AI stuff. So you get things like app slices, which sort of incorporate bits of other apps into your day-to-day life. So when you go into the start menu, you get, say, an app that goes, we notice that at this time of the day when you're at this location, you normally load this app, and it'll sort of present that to you as a suggestion in your app drawer and stuff like that. So,
because that could never be creepy.
Not at all. But this is Google, so we're used to creepy.
You mentioned digital wellbeing, and I don't want to miss that, because that's kind of here but not yet here, because it's still in beta.
It is.
And I find it interesting because this whole concept of don't use your phone too much is obviously something that everyone's picking up on because it's also in iOS 12. But do you think there's a risk that it'll, in classic Google fashion, it'll stay in beta nearly forever, and as such, Apple might be able to say, well, we've got our finished product out the door?
I think not. I think it's more, it's utilising a lot of the Android 9 features, so they're basically just keeping it in beta until we're seeing it rolling out to currently the Pixel and the Pixel 2. Once that starts extending beyond those phones, we'll start seeing it being added onto more. I also think it may be part of their strategy to keep it as a Pixel feature purely, which is what they've done for the last couple of Pixel phone releases, to sort of encourage people to look at the Pixel phones as maybe an option to purchase. So we may see it as an exclusive on, say, the Pixel 3 and, the whole line of Pixel phones for, say, maybe a month or two, and then it'll start rolling out elsewhere. But that also will tie in for the general rollout of Android 9 to other devices.
Are we going to see Android 9 roll out to more devices kind of on day one? Because I know Google's been working with more manufacturers to make sure that you don't have to wait years or pay maybe forever to get the latest version of Android.
Absolutely. This is actually a watershed moment for Android, because the Android Pie update is actually available now for the Essential phone on day one. So people were able to, who have the Essential phone, there's not a huge amount of them, but it is actually fully available. We're also seeing that the Nokia 7 Plus, which is an Android One phone, has actually been moved to the Beta 4 as of yesterday, I think it was. So they should be seeing it quite fast as well. And there's a whole raft of other phones that have basically been part of this beta program. So we're going to start seeing them pick it up fairly quickly. So this year we got the Essential phone on day one. Next year, maybe we'll have a whole raft of them.
It's an interesting one as well, because as you said before, they've used it as a kind of sales mechanism for Pixel phones, but of course the Pixel 3 is a month or more away from being formally revealed. That the leaks seem pretty extensive right now.
It's a flood now.
Do you think that the market for Pixel phones, those people who haven't yet bought a Pixel but might have thought about it, are actually going to pick up a Pixel 2 at this point in time, knowing that there's a better phone coming?
Well, we see it all the time of people going out to buy an iPhone and then literally finding out the next day that there was an event. So the general public isn't 100% aware that there is a time, like a rolling schedule for announcing these new phones. So they're doing good deals on the Pixel 2 at the moment. So, and the Pixel 2 is quite honestly a really great phone, and so you're still going to get a great deal on it.
Oh, totally. Don't get me wrong. I really like the Pixel 2 and especially the Pixel 2 XL. I wonder how much of a cross slice of people who know about Android Pie and care are not going to go, no, I'll wait for the Pixel 3.
It's one of those things that Google is walking a fine line, because they're trying to release a new version of Android, but also leaving it open for the manufacturers while still trying to sell a premium smartphone. So it's a really fine line that they've been treading. So keeping some of these things as exclusives for Pixels for a certain amount of time may work. I don't think it does, but that has been the strategy for the last couple of years. So, I mean, we'll just have to wait and see, really. That's like maybe in November we'll start seeing them.
I've been running it on a Pixel 2 XL for a while now, and I'm sure you have as well. And it runs beautifully. I'll be really interested to see how that scales down to some of the Android One devices that we've seen, some of those lower-end Nokia devices where, in theory, the part of that package should see them, jumping up to Android Pie sooner rather than later, you'd hope.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Android One platform, especially with the Nokia devices, that's been their whole strategy of fast updates and consistent updates for up to 2 or 3 years, like with feature updates for 2 years, security updates for 3. It's going to have to scale well, and I believe that Nokia has done probably one of the better jobs out there, because the phones are basically stock Android, so there's very little except for the camera that needs to be updated. It's literally just packet and send. And with things like Project Treble, that's really abstracted the hardware from the software layer, so it's literally just put a blob on and that'll automatically interact with the hardware. So I think this will probably be a good one, but with some of the phone manufacturers, notably someone like Samsung who likes to change a bit of the software, there may still be a bit of testing that slows down the rollout a bit.
Yeah, and there's always carrier testing to add on to that as well. Although, I mean, one of the more interesting, companies that makes a lot of changes to Android is Oppo. And I think it was the R15 Pro was an Android P beta phone as well.
Sure was, and it was a fairly lengthy process to actually get it on there, because you actually had to download it, flash it, and do all that sort of stuff. So it was a little bit awkward. That was the same with some of the other phones as well. And I'm actually interested to see how far Oppo goes with this, because it was quite a surprising one, given that their Color OS is fairly heavily skinned and nowhere really even in the ballpark of stock Android. So it's going to be interesting to see how it actually goes once they release a full official version of Android Pie for their devices.
And that's presuming they do, because this, of course, all does lead into that thing of Android fragmentation, and it is one of those things that Apple certainly never wastes the opportunity to kind of crow from the rooftops about relative levels of pickup. But I think it's a promising sign if you've got an Oppo who does that much, modification, saying, yeah, actually we can do this. I can't see why anyone else can't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they can get someone like Oppo on board to do this, it'd be a real winner for them. But again, it comes down to whether they actually do or not. I mean, Oppo hasn't actually had the best reputation when it comes to updates in the past, but that was prior to things like Project Treble. So it's a lot easier for them to actually put a lot of these things into effect. So I'm really hoping to see something of that. I mean, basically, Oppo do some really great hardware. We've got the Find X, hopefully on the horizon somewhere, and that was a really nice-looking phone despite the movable parts, and seeing Android Pie released on that would probably be a real winner for them.
How much do the telcos get in the way? Do they sometimes say, okay, well, we're only going to test this for last year's devices, so even though it might run on earlier devices, we haven't done our testing, so if you bought your phone from us, suck it, this is what you get.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Basically the carriers test it for everything. Anytime they do any sort of change, it always gets tested. So that's basically just one of the things that Android users do. We wait for the carriers. Apple certainly gets their...
But are the carriers, what I'm saying is, are the carriers the blockade here? Are they the problem?
Well, to a certain extent, they're a problem in terms of getting the software in a timely manner, but they don't really have a huge amount of say in whether the manufacturer decides they're going to release an update for a phone. That comes down to usually how popular the phone was and stuff like that.
Yeah. And having talked to the carriers and having looked through the way they do some of this testing, they'd argue fairly strongly that yes, it's a slowing process, but it's a necessary one to make sure that it reacts against the way the Australian setup exists, as it were.
Yeah.
That their user base doesn't suddenly have phones that crash all the time because of an unexpected code error or something. And like that. And we've seen they're not actually just sitting on it for the sake.
No,
of it.
That's it. And we've seen carriers pull both Android and Apple updates after an issue was discovered after it's been released. So there is definitely a reason for them to do the testing. So I feel there could be some streamlining in the process that would make it both users and carriers happier, but that's an ongoing conversation that everyone has to have.
So for the end user who just picks up Android 9, what's the thing that's going to jump out at them as the most from a user perspective that's changed?
It's depending on how familiar they are with Android, it looks a little bit different. A lot of people are talking about the simplicity, so that takes into account things like the quick settings have changed, so you can no longer go to a drop-down menu when you actually go to, say, Wi-Fi networks. You've actually got to hold on the icon and it takes you into the settings. But one of the things everyone's talking about is this new gesture navigation, which is in the form of a pill. It's not actually enabled by default, so you've still got your standard back, your home, and your multitasking buttons, but there's also this new gesture navigation, which if you go into the settings, you can turn it on, and that basically gives you a little pill, a little icon at the bottom, and removes everything else. And it basically takes you to swipe up to bring you into the overview menu, which is basically where you go to the multitasking, so you can then choose from other apps you've opened, or you can go a full swipe up to the top, and that takes you into your app drawer, which you can then load and launch other apps. There's also things like contextual auto rotate. So if you're lying in bed and you're sort of doing that thing where your phone screen's flipping around, it'll actually bring up an auto rotate lock, so you can actually lock it into an orientation. So that's just little touches that Google's sort of been doing to sort of help people out. And it's more claiming back some of the rougher points that Android's had in the past. So things like adjusting your volume it always used to adjust the ringer volume rather than the media volume, which is generally what people want to do when they're adjusting volumes. So now it defaults to the media volume is what it's actually adjusting. So they're the sort of things that people are going to sort of notice. All the AI stuff, even Google themselves have said it's actually going to take time for the operating system to learn your habits and start offering you better suggestions. So down the track, maybe in 6 months' time, we're going to start going, oh yeah, I've noticed it's been doing that. So that's one of the things we'll sort of have to wait.
I guess that's a bit like having a Google Home. It's a bit like training a puppy. At the first, it's a real pain. And then after a while, you realize that it's starting to behave a bit better. It knows what you want a bit more. You're not having to correct it as often. So I guess the phones will be the same way. Just over time, you'll go, hey, yeah, I haven't had to put up with that problem anymore because it's kind of figured out this is what I want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's absolutely spot on. I 100% agree with that. So I sort of want to fast forward the next 3 months or 6 months and see exactly how this goes.
The gesture navigation's kind of neat. I do like it, and obviously there's a comparison point with a competing platform there. But I reckon if you're Huawei, you've probably got your noses even further out of joint because they've had that kind of thing as an option since the P10, I think it was.
Oh, I think it was even earlier. I think even P9 had it. So yeah, but I agree. There's certainly a history of Google seeing a good idea in someone's platform and going, yeah, we'll take that. So, I mean...
Yeah, and Apple can't take the moral high ground there either.
Oh, God, no, not at all.
I don't think anyone can take the moral high ground at the moment.
No.
But what I find interesting in that, of course, is that Apple used the integration of that kind of functionality, shall we say, without getting the lawyers involved, for the iPhone X in order to get rid of a fingerprint sensor, in order to say, hey, we can just do this with camera, you don't need anything on the front. Dan, do you reckon, given the number of Android manufacturers who've this year come out and said, oh yeah, we can do a Face ID-ish sort of thing, do you reckon some of them will use Android Pie as the jumping off point to say, and we don't need a front button, we don't need a back button, we'll simplify and go to a facial ID system?
I think they're going to do what Google's done with the gesture navigation on the Pixel and basically keep it as a option. So they do take metrics on what people are using on the operating system, just anonymized data, and they'll sort of take that into account when they're building the next version. So I think Android Pie is going to be one of those sort of interesting ones where they're going to gather data, and when we go into whatever Q is going to be, Android Q, that's when they're going to start seeing the gesture navigation either come in fully or maybe be quite heavily refined.
Of course, Android Q is going to be a tricky one to name. What do you think it'll be?
I'm thinking they go another Nestle promotion. We have Android Quick.
So, Alex, if you've heard anything about games lately, you've heard about Fortnite. Now, Fortnite's coming to Android, but perhaps not in the way people expected. What's going on?
Yeah, so Fortnite will be here shortly, I can say, and Epic has basically revealed that it's not going to use the Google Play Store. It's going to distribute it at its own APK, which means you'll have to sideload it onto your phone. And this is kind of a contentious thing, because the way Android handles that is it will allow you to install an app from anywhere, but you have to explicitly say within your settings, hey, I want to install an app from outside the Google Play Store. And traditional security advice says that this is a no-no.
But haven't we spent the last 10 years writing articles telling people not to do that kind of thing?
Well, people reading articles, yes, we have, and it feels like the message doesn't always get across. Dan, why are they doing it? What's the appeal for Epic?
I think this is a good time to sort of throw up a few sound effects of cash registers ringing. I think it's purely cash.
Lots of cash registers.
I mean, Google basically does exactly what Apple does. They take a 30% cut of the developers' revenue through Google Play. They basically say it's for things like maintaining payments and stuff like that. But when you're dealing with something like with a phenomenon like Fortnite, that doesn't scale exactly really well. I mean, you're talking about millions of dollars, potentially hundreds of $millions over the next couple of years. So,
much more than that. I mean, last month's figures, I actually did go and look this up. Last month, Fortnite took in $1 billion. So Google would be looking at $300 million for hosting.
That's a lot of chimichangas.
That's an awful lot of chimichangas.
Yeah, so...
But why would they... is there a history... Is there a precedent of this happening in Android space?
Not really. The only apps that you've had this sort of installing outside of Google Play is apps that haven't really been in line with Google's terms and service. So things like apps that download YouTube videos and stuff like that. That's basically been where they've been. So it's a bit of a sort of watershed moment that Google sort of needs to look at. I mean, that's a lot of money they're missing out on. But it's also on the flip side proving that developers don't need to actually rely on Google Play. So that's something that they could use in the European Union sort of stoush, saying that developers don't have to use us. So,
although weirdly, there is an example on the iOS side of the fence, because Amazon pulled all of the book buying ability out of its Kindle app for iOS. You can't buy a book that way. You've actually got to use the mobile browser to buy the book, and then you can download it into the Kindle app for exactly the same reason. They didn't want to give Apple 30% of their book sales.
And who would?
But then they couldn't bypass the iTunes store, though, the way that this lot are doing.
Well, except they did a kind of an end-around motion on it by saying, right, you'll buy this stuff another way. We'll get the money another way.
Yeah.
Dan, do you think, though, that it's a big security issue? It concerns me because we've already seen, in fact, fake Fortnite for Android. It's already been tried by people. And with Epic coming out and saying, yes, this is the way you'll do it, I can't help but shake this feeling that it's going to get worse.
It's definitely a problem that has potential for issues. So if you don't know that you have to explicitly go to Fortnite's website to download it, and you maybe click a banner ad that says "Quick, get it here" and stuff like that, you're definitely going to be in trouble. Google has spent a lot of time actually building a lot of these protections into Google Play services. So if you're using a Google Android version, not one of the Chinese version of Android, which don't have Play services, you are actually fairly well protected. Google Play Protect was introduced last year, or I think it was even in 2016, and that sort of does constant checking of what is actually happening on the phone. So even if you do happen to install something outside of the Google Play Store, if it detects a signature of an app that actually has some malware that it knows about, it will actually block that app. So there is the potential that Google could protect users from this, even if it's not from Google Play. But overall, we've been telling people to download stuff only from Google Play for a reason. It's honestly the best way that you can be protected.
It's also kind of problematic in that different versions of Android treat sideloading in different ways. I like Samsung's approach, for example, where basically you have to say, yes, look, I want to download this, but only unlock for installing this application. Don't leave the gate wide open. But not every Android device does that.
Yes, absolutely. That is one of the better implementations that Samsung's decided to do. So it's one of those things. Maybe this will change Google's behavior in the next version of Android, or maybe in a Play Services update during the year. This is maybe the thing that changes that behavior.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Dan for joining us for the show.
Always a pleasure. Just call on me.
As always, we love to get your feedback on the show, so feel free to comment via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
Thanks everyone for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. And if you've subscribed, leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your great podcasts. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.